I've gotten better. Slow.
So, but it's already been.
First time you had it,
Thanksgiving, you had Thanksgiving.
I just had a sinus infection, it's still messing with me. I thought I had a tooth going bad. I went to the dentist yesterday and he said, oh, it's your sinus. Well, it probably bad, you know, I thought I was going to have a root canal. And he got over there, he gave me some antibiotics and I said, no, there ain't nothing showing up. Well, I don't think.
Give me just a second.
Well, just go to. And we, conference, yeah. For divine.
That's when the first thing to say out loud is you.
How much is that an hour?
Well, yeah, it works.
Okay.
All right, like I said, I'm just primarily wearing this for
Well, if it was for future use
the
too, in case.
computer. So there may be, I've had several calls, so they wouldn't be here if they were gonna listen to it online. Can they do that? Are they been able to do that tonight?
Yeah, it's streaming on Facebook right now.
Okay,
I wanna see how it sounds on here.
all right.
Very or.
So you need me to keep talking while you're out there?
No, she said you're good now.
You what?
She said you're good.
Okay.
Yeah, and then, so.
What's our jump from 1,700 to 5,000 for 6 more inches of?
Yeah. What costs more than
All right, you're out here.
Yeah.
You better.
Okay, hold on.
Okay.
Amazon. And April, May of last year. She got invited to go and stay with a tribe in Virginia. Colorado to somewhere else in Florida, and then from Florida to somewhere in South America, like Central America, and then from there to Brazil. And then she did another flight within the country, and then train and then boat. Or then a bus and then a boat, like, it's a really complicated process to get to this really remote.
I'll unmute this, I'll turn this on.
It's gravel.
Yeah.
I came down there tonight, very slow.
On now?
Right, is it?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. Is that
Shade.
acoustic wise, is that okay for you all in the audience? Is that too loud or?
So we are streaming to Facebook right now, and we'll have the video, we'll polish it and stuff and edit it and put it up to people watch later. That is always like to warn people, we are live on Facebook. And so we have that where you can hear back there in case we do get kind of busy. I just want to introduce again and
Well, I thank you and I thank you all for coming and thank you people that are here online with us tonight. Tonight we're going to talk about the War of 1812 and what I primarily going to call tonight is basically setting the stage, and we're going to jump around all over the place a little bit. And talk about the causes and the ramifications of the War of 1812, but before we do that, we're going to talk about a couple of more wars for just a few minutes. And the French and Indian War, and the reason I wanted to talk about it, we're going to be talking a lot about the Native Americans, which I'm going to refer to as Indians, which we know they are. And we know why they were called Indians, it's because they were hunting India when they discovered America, and the name has stuck. It is 2024. So instead of Native Americans, I am going to use the term Indians. The French and Indian War was known as the 7-Year War. It ended in 1763 with the Treaty of Paris. And here is a fact that I've uncovered while looking for this, is that had it not been for the Indians, we would not be in charge of this country. Because as you know, the French and Indian War was not between the French and the Indians. The French and the Indians tried to run the British and American colonists out of the colonies. We were not the United States of America. And there was one federation of Indians that did not go with the French, and that was the Iroquois, primarily the Mohawks. And one man is responsible for that primarily, and he's a Johnson. Sir William Johnson, and that is a story all in itself. He was adopted and given the Indian name Warigaway. He was a Mohawk, and had it not been for him, the Iroquois nation would have went with the rest of the Indians, and there would not have been a United States of America. We wouldn't be speaking English, we'd be speaking French. So we know what happened after the French and Indian War. We ran France off. They went primarily to Canada. So after the French and Indian War, settlers claiming land. And it's what I find in a sense is amazing is that for 150 years, we stayed in the Piedmont region over on the coast. There were a few of us. Primarily, your French came from the north, the English came from the east, the Spanish came from the south. And they were all after one thing. And in researching this war, I came across a statement, and it did not say who made it. And I thought how relevant it is for today, so I'm going to introduce this little statement tonight. And it says, greed will overcome common sense. And greed, I'm not going to get into politics in the present situation of the day, but greed is driving our nation today, and greed is what was driving the people that first came in here. But if you sit and think about England, what government did England have? They had a monarch. Well, under a monarch, the people in England, Boone's ancestors and the ancestors that came over, you could not own land. You could not even get, if they caught you with a deer or a stag or any other wild creature that you were harvesting for food, even though you were hungry, you could be put in prison or put to death, and many of them were. You were not even allowed to take a fish out of the stream. So when that carried over here, we went land crazy, as some of us do today. when it opened up. And after the Revolutionary War, which ended in 1783, 20 years after the French and Indian War, and it opened up this great nation, Kentucky was a county at the end of the Revolutionary War. We were Kentucky County, Virginia. And people talk about Boone, discovering Cumberland Gap. No, he didn't. He knew it was there. We knew it was there. There was a trail there. There was a buffalo trail, a game trail that you could drive a tractor down. We were scared to go through. There was another gap above, Pound Gap, which people came through. And a few of them did. They had the nerve to come through. But primarily we stayed in the Piedmont region. After the Revolutionary War, this land opened up, and here they came. Now, Duquesne, which became Fort Pitt, after we defeated the French in the French and Indian War, Fort Duquesne came from Fort Pitt at the confluence of the Monongahela and Yokohama River, which became the Stele Lafitte, the beautiful river. That's what the Grand River, some say the French named it, some say the French and Indians named it, but they started coming down it in droves by the thousands. And it's upset the Shawnees. It's upset all of them. But one thing about the Indians, just like the Iroquois going with us, they could not get along. The Shawnees actually started out in Lower Alabama, and worked their way up through Georgia, Tennessee, Kentucky, and settled in Ohio. They called it Chaligatha. We refer to it today as Chillicothe. And the reason we're talking about that is this was a big parameter in the War of 1812. And I want to share with you some facts about the War of 1812 before we started. Fact one, the war was fought between Great Britain and the United States, and it sounds like this was a short war, 1812 to 1815. No, this war actually started back in the 1770s, really. The War of 1812 was fought between the United States and Great Britain, backed by their Canadian colonies and Native American allies. 29 years after the American War for Independence, Great Britain and the United States found themselves embroiled in conflict. June 1st, 1812, President James Madison sent a list of grievances to Congress. 4 days later, they granted a declaration of war. He signed the declaration on June the 18th, 1812, officially initiating the war. On paper, this war spanned 2 years, 8 months. It ended in February of 1815. Now, there were many reasons that Great Britain and us went to war. Mounting tensions, global political conflict. We had a merchant marine. Now, going back to even the Revolutionary War, France was our ally. Had it not been for France having a navy and fighting our war for us, again, we wouldn't be here. We'd be speaking French. The merchant marines had doubled over the first decade of our 19th century. British citizens generally feared the possibility of being surpassed by the American merchant shipping. In 1807, as a part of their war with France, Britain introduced trade restrictions prohibiting neutral countries to trade with France. We were considered to be a neutral country. But guess what Britain says? And all's fair in love and war. Britain says, if you were born in Britain and you move to America, we have the right to stop a ship on the seas and take you off that ship and put you back in the British Navy. Well, how did they know where you were born? We didn't carry IDs. No one knew where you were born. So this was called impressments. The United States saw this as a blatant violation of international law, specifically targeting Americans' growing economy. Along with restricting American trade, the British were actively seizing American ships and sailors. For years, British had been capturing American soldiers and forcing them into serving in the Royal Navy. Again, this was called impressment. From 1804 until 1812, about the time that we declared war, they took 10,000 men from American ships. And not only did they take the men, but in many instances, they took the ship. I think the nail in the proverbial coffin was in 1807. In June, July of 1807, a ship called the Chesapeake should have had 50 guns on it. It did not. So a British schooner pulled up beside it. Not only did they take the men, but they took the ship. And as Popeye would say, we got in our Popeye moment. It was like, we've had all we can stand no more. Thomas Jefferson, who was president, closed the entire coast of America, the East Coast, to British ships. And they did not like that. Now, the origin of the conflict did not exist just among the maritime, on the sea. The British supported the Native American tribes in the Northwest Territory, which would be Ohio, Indiana, and a little part of Michigan. And again, we were land hungry, and you can't blame them. I mean, you know, I own a little bit of land, and I treasure my land. But they wanted this land just for survival. Now, at this time, neither side was prepared for war, because England was still fighting France. And I did not get to go see the movie, but the movie Napoleon just came out. And in researching this, I found out had Napoleon not met his Waterloo with the British, guess where he was coming next? He was coming here. He was coming to America. He already had plans. Had he not been defeated at Waterloo, had he been victorious at Waterloo, they were coming back to take America, back from Britain. So again, but we're still speaking English. Despite Congress authorizing the expansion of the military, harsh disciplinary conditions and low pay created a lack of growth within the United States. Low pay. They call themselves dime a day, men. Make $3 a month. Now here's something else that happened. You keep hearing about the militia from Kentucky and the militia from Tennessee. Well, we still have militias in some instances in some areas, but the militia was drafted. They weren't all volunteers. So when we became a country, our government had the right to impress you into service or draft you into service. So you could literally be impressed into service by your own country. And the people from Kentucky, most of the men from Kentucky, they were fighters. But what did they want you to do? We didn't do like we did in Vietnam. In World War I and World War II, when you conquered a place, what did you do? You kept the land. So we started bringing more soldiers and building strings of forts. And next week, I will have a map showing many of these forts. Again, we were not prepared. We didn't have the money. We didn't have the resources. We didn't have the foundries yet to build the cannons. We were still relying heavily upon France and Spain for part of our military hardware and so forth. France, as a result of the war with France, the vast majority of their navy was held up in a blockade, while Britain had 6,034 troops stationed in Canada. The British could not spare many more from the war with France. So after the Revolutionary War, we forced Britain to Canada. So you have 6,000, almost 7,000 soldiers, British soldiers, in Canada. Fact number 4, President James Madison believed the United States could easily capture Canada. Well, he was wrong. We didn't have the manpower. We were doing good to hang on with what we had. And we went into Canada to capture it, to make the United States, and that was a mistake. Now, our capital got burned in the War of 1812. But guess what we did first? Yorktown, Toronto was the capital of the British. We burned it. So that was payback. Thomas Jefferson once remarked, the acquisition of Canada would be a mere matter of marching. However, the situations Americans found in Canada was not what we expected. The 7,000 American soldiers involved in the invasion were untrained, poorly led, and self-serving. The invasion was a complete failure. With only a few months, the British pushed the Americans back and had taken all of what was then the Michigan territory. So it's kind of like Ukraine is right now with Russia. Not only did they push back, but they took a little more of the United States than they had before they left. Another fact, and we talked about this, the War of 1812 inspired the Star-Spangled Banner. While negotiating the exchange of prisoners, Francis Scott Key was held on a British ship for the entirety of the Battle of Baltimore. From his place on the ship, he could see the American Fort McHenry, which became the center of the British attacks. He nervously watched, hoping to see the American flag flying at the end of the bombardment, signifying the American troops still held the fort. When the attack concluded, the sight of the large American flag flying above the fort inspired Key. In the back of a letter, he composed the first draft of a poem titled "The Defense of Fort McHenry." And this area just said, as a child, she went there and spent several days. And I have been there. It's a beautiful place still to this day. It's a treasure. Following the war, the poem was set to music by John Stafford Smith in 1931. President Herbert Hoover officially acknowledged the Star-Spangled Banner as our national anthem. Now, many famous Americans fought and served during the War of 1812, not just Americans, but Native Americans also, which we're going to talk about later. William Henry Harrison, the famous hero of Tippecanoe in 1811, he gained more fame from the War of 1812, leading successful campaigns against the British and Native Americans in the Northeast. The Whigs used his reputation as a rugged general and frontiersman, despite actually being from the Virginia aristocracy, to secure a presidential bid in 1841. First president to die in office. Only been in office a month. And before we go any farther, I want to talk a little bit about William Henry Harrison. And with our other facts, this would be a good time to jump in here and do this. He was born in 1773, February, in Virginia. He died in 1841. As we know, he was the 9th president. Age. We're talking about age in this presidential election. And this is an interesting fact. He was the oldest man at age 67 ever elected president up to this time. So 67 was old, in 1841. Because you get, he outlived most of the other men. His grandson was Benjamin Harrison. He was the 23rd president of the United States. His father wanted him to be a doctor, but he had no interest. He went to the finest of colleges. His father, Benjamin Harrison, was a long prominent in Virginia politics. He became a member of the Virginia House of Burgesses in 1764. He opposed Patrick Henry's Stamp Act resolutions the following year. He was also a signer of the Declaration of Independence, a member of the Continental Congress, and the governor of Virginia. And what I admire about William Henry Harrison was that he could have stayed and led a pretty soft life. He was a lawyer. He could have practiced law. He could have done anything but what he wanted to be. He was well known by George Washington. And after his father passed away, he went to Washington and told him he didn't want to go to medical school. He wanted to be a soldier. And President Washington declared him an ensign. He had the power to do that. And appointed him to go to Fort Washington, which was near Cincinnati, what we know as Cincinnati, Ohio. Because at this time, we were getting ready, and we're gonna talk about it maybe tonight, we have time. There was a campaign against the Indians by General St. Clair. And he was hoping that he could make it to Fort Washington, which is right across the river, about where Covington is today, right across the mouth of the Licking, to join in this campaign. And he's lucky that he didn't make it, because if he had, he probably would have died. He wouldn't have lived. But because he did make it and he did live, he was very, very instrumental in us winning the War of 1812. And it mentions here, the Battle of Falling Timbers, but he was assigned, the following year, he was made a lieutenant and subsequently served as an aide-de-camp to General Anthony Wayne, who was engaged in a struggle in the Northwest Territory. Now, the following year, he married a lady by the name of Anna Tuthill Sims, and because her father objected to the match, they married in secret. He was promoted to captain, and for a brief period, he served as commander of Fort Washington, and he resigned from the Army in 1798. He negotiated several treaties, and I guess right now would be a good time to mention Tecumseh. Tecumseh was 3 years younger than him, and they hated each other. But it was a hate with respect, if there is such a thing. They didn't fear each other. And another thing I respect about William Henry Harrison, having known, and one of my relatives was in Special Forces for 17 years. And there's one way, one of the only ways that you're ever going to really defeat your enemy if you are engaged in a long-term battle with them, and that is to get to know them. I mean, know the food they eat, clothes they wear, the weapons they use. You have to become their enemy. And that's basically what William Henry Harrison did. He got into Tecumseh's head, which was very difficult to do. I've studied Tecumseh extensively and been to many of the places. I wore my son out with, growing up, going on spring break. We would take off and travel the old high country. And still to this day, there is an outdoor drama called Tecumseh. Near Fairfield, I can't remember right off the top of my head, but it's there. If you get a chance, go see it. I've seen it about 5 times and learn something every time I go. And it isn't expensive. You can buy the package to where you can go backstage with the actors before it. It's an outdoor drama with horses, and it's very much worth going to see. So in a sense, you have 2 warfare experts here that are going after each other. But William Henry Harrison, he became the governor of Indiana. He had a house, a mansion built there called Grassland that's still there. Tecumseh had a brother known as the prophet, but he wasn't the prophet. Tecumseh was the true prophet. But back to William Henry Harrison, he was a man to be very much respected. And we're going to talk about Tecumseh here too before the night's over. But with the other facts, William Henry Harrison, it was many famous Americans. We mentioned him first. General Winfield Scott, he was the first gaining military experience in the war of fighting in the Niagara frontier after experiencing the ill-trained citizens militia of the War of 1812. He established a decor for our military that still exists to this day. He started putting stuff on paper and said, this is what you have to do to build an army. Perhaps the most famous American is Andrew Jackson. He served as a major general of the Tennessee militia during the War of 1812, first fighting in the Creek War, and after accepting the Creek surrender in 1814, he was given command of New Orleans and promoted to general. And at the Battle of New Orleans in January of 1815, now this is like the American Revolution. The last battle of the American Revolution was fought after the treaty was signed. The last battle for the War of 1812 was fought after the treaty was signed. The Battle of New Orleans didn't have to be fought at all. But we stopped the British, and this victory made Jackson a national hero. He became known as the Savior of New Orleans. His national recognition and military record helped him win the contested presidential election of 1828. Fact number 7. The United States Capitol, Washington, D.C. was burned during the war. After the Battle of Bladensburg, the British General Robert Ross captured the nation's capital and burned down essential centers of American government, specifically targeting the executive mansion, which we know as the White House, and the Capitol building. British soldiers set the city ablaze. The fires were put out by a massive thunderstorm less than a day later. So maybe that was the divine intervention. We don't know. And it's the only time a foreign enemy has captured Washington, D.C. Well, every cloud has a silver lining. So guess what happened? After it burnt down, they built it back better, bigger, and stronger. And it has been built back several times, but the core is still there today. Fact number 8, the treaty again officially ended the war. It was signed on December the 24th, 1814, although not officially ratified until February the 17th of 1815, officially ending the war. Despite Britain making clear gains during the war, many within the British government, military, including the Prime Minister and the Duke of Wellington, argued for a peace treaty without demands for territory. The Duke of Wellington argued that while they could gain territory eventually, the current state of our military operations, however failed, does not entitle us to demand it. So this war, there were basically no winners. No one paid anyone any money. No one lost any land. All that was lost was lives. And there were a lot of Kentuckians lost, which we're going to get to here in a minute. Number 9, nearly every group involved in the war left victorious. In the wake of the war, both American and British officials and civilians were satisfied with the end of the war. America won the battle, the final battle of the war, the Battle of New Orleans, and saw it as a decisive defeat, cementing America as truly an independent nation. While many in Great Britain saw this war as a part of the more significant wars with the French, which the British decisively won at Waterloo. The Canadians also found a sense of pride in the war. Having survived the American invasion, it created a renewed sense of Canadian pride. The only group who generally lost were the Indians, who lost their powerful British allies, and they seemed to be overwhelmed by the American settlers. In fact, 10, which is basically a tourist bush, many of these battlefields still exist. The War of 1812 has been called America's Forgotten War, as is, you will know the other forgotten war? Korean. We call the Korean War the Forgotten War. It is studied much less than the American Revolution or the Civil War. But many of the battlefields still exist. You can go visit them. Now, we're going to talk about 10 things we didn't know about the War of 1812. And it says, and I agree with this, and I felt like these were pertinent to bring in tonight and talk about, is the war needed to be rebranded. Most people, when you talk about the War of 1812, they think, well, look, there was a war in 1812. You don't realize that this war actually started before we were a country, in a sense. And after the American Revolution, it really picked up. It says the War of 1812 is an easy handle for students who struggle with date, but the name is a misnomer that makes the conflict sound like a mere whisper of a war that began and ended the same year. In reality, this war lasted 32 months. Following the U.S. declaration of war. Also confusing is the Battle of New Orleans, the largest of the war and a resounding U.S. victory. The battle occurred in January 1815, 2 weeks after we signed the treaty. The largest of the war resounding U.S. victory, the battle occurred in January, again, 2 weeks later. News traveled slowly then. Even so, it's technically incorrect to say the Battle of New Orleans was fought after the war, which didn't officially end until February the 16th, 1815, when the president and Congress ratified the treaty. So, a lot of things. Impressment may have been a trumped-up charge. Well, it could have been 10,000 people, 10,000 people. Did the rockets really have a red glare? Yes, they did. And there were truly rockets fired in the War of 1812, as we talked about Francis Scott Key. And another interesting thing that came from this war was the Star Spangled Banner isn't the only patriotic icon that dates to the War of 1812. Uncle Sam. Remember the recruiting posters, the white-haired Uncle Sam? Well, where did Uncle Sam come from? Well, look at our initials, U.S. And this is almost a joke, but it is. A man by the name of Sam Wilson, and I know a Sam Wilson, I know two Sam Wilson, packed meat for the war. They salted pork, put it in barrels. He lived in Troy, New York. He was a military supplier named Sam Wilson. He packed meat ration in barrels labeled U.S. according to the local law. The soldier was told the initials stood for Uncle Sam. Wilson, who was feeding the army, the name endured as shorthand for U.S. government. However, the image of Uncle Sam as a white bearded recruiter didn't appear for another century. So, that's where Uncle, you know, you dig up a lot of things from your research in this. And as I mentioned earlier, the burning of Washington was capital payback. To the Americans, the burning of Washington by British troops was a shocking act by barbaric invaders. Yeah, sounds good, doesn't it? But the burning was payback for similar torching by American forces a year before. After defeating the British troops at York, today's Toronto, then the capital of Upper Canada, U.S. soldiers plundered the town and burned its parliament. The British exacted revenge in August of 1814 when they burnt the White House, Congress, and other buildings. Something, I've studied this war several times. I even, this first time I've heard that. I did not know which, that's something that we didn't. We don't want our students maybe to know. Maybe it's something we're ashamed of, but we burnt their capital first. So, you know, it sounds like a middle school playground fight. Long term, this may have been a blessing for the U.S. Capitol. The combustible President's House, as it was then known, was rebuilt in sturdier form with elegant furnishings and white paint replacing the whitewash. The books burned at Congress's library were replaced by Thomas Jefferson. He had thousands of books, so he replaced their libraries. And again, the Native Americans were the biggest losers. The ill-fated General Custer at his start in this war. Fighting. In 1813, by the River Raisin in Michigan, the British and their Native American allies dealt the U.S. its most steaming defeat in the War of 1812, and the battle was followed by an Indian attack on wounded prisoners. This incident sparked an American battle cry, "Remember the Raisin." We're going to talk about this later on. William Henry Harrison, who later led the U.S. to victory in the battle against the British, is remembered on his tomb as the avenger of the massacre of the River Raisin. George Armstrong Custer remembered the Raisin too. He spent much of his youth in Monroe, the city that grew up along the Raisin. In 1871, he was photographed with a War of 1812 veteran beside a monument to Americans slaughtered during and after the battle. 5 years later, Custer also died fighting the Indians in one of the most lopsided defeats for the U.S. forces in the river. Now that's ironic for him to have his picture taken with a veteran of the War of 1812. and then be slaughtered like he was, later on. Now, I fished a lot up in this area on Lake Erie, like for 14 years in a row, so I've been to a lot of these places, and I didn't know, after I got up there and started looking around and noticing some things that I had read, you know, I got to questioning, because when you go out on the lake, especially when you're gonna maybe lose a little bit side of land, which Lake Erie isn't that big, but we could look across when we left, Monroe, Michigan was to our left, you could see the smokestacks of the factories and the shipyards. And then where we took out, when we came out on the lake, there was a big nuclear reactor, so when we got out there on the lake, you could see Monroe, Michigan, you could see the nuclear reactor, you could see the puff of steam coming from it. Now, as we push farther out on the lake, I looked off in the distance and you could see a huge monument. My cousin had a boat that he kept on Lake Erie, and I asked him, I said, first time we went out there, I said, what is that monument? He said, that's Oliver Hazard Perry. Perry County. Hazard. How did Hazard, Kentucky, get named after a guy with a statue? It's on Lake Erie. It tore me up. I couldn't figure it out. I had to go find out. How did you get a ship on Lake Erie? St. Lawrence Seaway wasn't open. You couldn't come in and out. But we knew that Lake Erie, all the Great Lakes, and at the time, you could, but it was very difficult to move from lake to lake like you can now. You couldn't do it. You were landlocked. So they built the shipyards. But the answer is over 1/3 of the people on Oliver Hazard Perry's ships were Kentuckians. It's incredible. And I think they weren't sailors. You know, that we didn't have locks on the, you know, there was no, you know, there was a Kentucky, but there wasn't a Hazard but some of those people were from there, and when this war was over, they went back and settled the country. Now, how did they play a big part? Well, one thing, and I don't know where we will get to it tonight, there's one thing you can do if you were a Kentuckian. You could shoot. You were brought up shooting. And we're going to talk about the Kentucky rifle here, maybe not tonight, but we're going to. They kept, and Oliver Hazard Perry, what we didn't have, but I think 2 or 3 ships that they built on Lake Erie, and the British had 10 to 15. And he went in and sailed right straight into them. But what I didn't understand and didn't know at the time, he had Kentucky sharpshooters on his ships. And when they were trying to fire their cannons at his ship, our sharpshooters would pick the men off like the cannons. So again, you know, we didn't have a group force of Navy. We had Kentucky sharpshooters on a ship out on Lake Erie, and it's a massive monument. If you ever get a chance to go up there. And another thing, about, what was it? Oliver Hazard Perry. We had met the enemy, and they are ours. What he said. And when he was talking about they are ours, we took the English ships. And his ship was devastated. I mean, how it stayed afloat, no one even knows. But I will read a little passage out of that battle before. What I'm thinking is we will take three sessions to do this. And when you actually sit down and look and see what he did in that battle, it's astounding. I actually had written down the number. Yeah, we have met the enemy and they are ours, and they are ours. He took 2 ships, 2 brigs, a schooner and a sloop, So 2 before we took 7 of their ships at the Battle of Lake Erie, primarily because of Kentucky sharpshooters. There was almost a United States of England. The political tension persisted as the war progressed, culminating with the Hartford Convention, a meeting of New England dissidents who seriously flirted with the idea of seceding from the United States. They rarely used the term secession or disunion, however, as they viewed it as merely a separation of 2 sovereign states. I didn't know this. For much of the preceding 15 years, you had your Federalists, and they talked about trying to divide us into 2 nations, even then, in 1815. And the War of 1812 actually ignited this. Canadians know more about this war than we do. Few Americans celebrate the War of 1812, recall the facts that the U.S. invaded its northern neighbor 3 times in the course of the conflict. But the same isn't true in Canada, where a memory of the war and pride in its outcome runs deep. Or just lucky we run out of ammunition, I like to say. We own Canada too. Now, I have some more other facts here that I wanted to share with you from a book that the Historical Society sent with us. And again, it repeats, I know I'm repeating myself here. Congress declared war on England in 1812, but on January the 18th, 1813, a detachment of 900 Kentucky militia was ordered to attack 2 companies of Canadians and 200 Indians located at Frenchtown on the River Raisin. Through faulty intelligence, British reinforcements were overlooked, permitting some 2,000 British and Indians under the command of Henry Proctor to arrive and attack the force of 750 Kentuckians and the 250 regulars who were sent to enforce them. After being forced to surrender, the American wounded were abandoned by the British to their drunken Indian allies, who massacred the defense's men. More than 400 Kentuckians died during this action. We're going to read some more about, and it decimated the state, the territory of Kentucky. And again, here I said a third, but 1/4 of Commodore Perry's men at the Battle of Lake Erie were volunteers from Kentucky. The sharpshooting skills of these Kentuckians who served aboard the ships in the Battle of Lake Erie ensured the ultimate victory and control of the waterways. The rifle would fire into the enemy ship, shooting with deadly accuracy into the ranks of the seamen who were manning the cannons, thus reducing their effective fire. Now, Henry Clay of Lexington, he was the war hawk. He was the man beating the war drum, but he was also in Belgium at the signing of the treaty. He was a very, very important man, as we know. And it says here that more than half of the American soldiers killed in the War of 1812 were Kentuckians. I have a book that came from the Historical Society. This is a roster of the volunteer officers and soldiers from Kentucky in the War of 1812. This book will be one of very big state. One whole book of Kentuckians. Like the saying goes, if you want a soldier, go to Kentucky. If you want a politician, go to Tennessee. Now, Bill, I'm just quoting just the facts, man, that Sergeant Riley would say. And again, we have to laugh and throw some humor into this. And I found a story here, and again, this book that these came from, I have to thank Yvonne and David. The Call to Arms, a collection of fascinating stories, events, personalities, and facts about Kentucky's military history. Now, this story was originally printed in Harper's Weekly, and it set forth the facts surrounding Kentucky's militia pig. Never heard of this. It seems that a company of volunteers, which was 99.9% of us in this war were volunteers. They were leaving they had assembled at Harrisburg, and upon leaving the outskirts of town, they found two pigs who were fighting. They stopped to observe the combat, and when the march commenced, the victorious pig followed the company. The pig followed him up to the river at Cincinnati, and while the men crossed on a ferry boat, the pig plunged into the river, swam across. It thus became a great pet and was fed by the soldiers during their march. The pig made it to Lake Erie, where it remained in the care of a man who volunteered to look after its peace. I kept waiting for them to have barbecue, but they didn't. When the recruits returned to the American side, the pig rejoined their march. So how he survived, I don't know. There must have been plenty of food to eat. When the army recrossed the Ohio River at Maysville, it was decided to leave the animal in the hands of the local farmer. The pig was eventually taken to the home of the Kentucky governor, Isaac Shelby, near Danville, where it lived the rest of its days in ease and plenty. So, but if you study your farm animals, a pig is smarter than a cow or a horse. It's one of the most intelligent creatures that we have. So, let's see. The Kentucky Rifle. We probably have time to talk about it. Now, where was the Kentucky Rifle made? Not Kentucky. Because there wasn't any place in Kentucky to make a rifle at the time. They were made in Pennsylvania. But what I found out, the first time you read about this rifle, it said, well, the reason it's called Kentucky Rifle is because most of the people that were carrying it were going to Kentucky. But what I didn't realize, a gunsmith, now you can buy custom-made weapons. They make weapons for women, they make weapons for men and for youth, sizes and colors and so forth. But they modified the rifle to make it lighter, to make it more accurate. It says the Kentucky Rifle received its highly regarded reputation from pioneers such as Boone, Kenton, and John Finley, who used it with terrific effect in their defense against Indians and British. Although originally made in Pennsylvania, rifle makers moved to Kentucky in an early stage of the settlement and successfully continued their trade. The Kentucky Rifle was used by the troops of George Rogers Clark in his conquest in present-day Illinois, the Battle of Tippecanoe, the Thames, and New Orleans, and in all other battles. It also played a prominent part in equipping the early trappers in the Rocky Mountains. Now, the rifle, a flintlock. You know what a flintlock is? Well, you have to have a spark. It used the flint. Sold for 2 cents. Your gun flint for about 2 cents, and you were issued. It had a barrel, which generally measured from 40 to 45 inches, and whose bore diameter was approximately a 38 to a 45 caliber. Now, I have a book here that I received for Christmas in 1960 that I've held on to all these years. And in it has a chapter called The Kentucky Rifle, which is one of my treasures. And it shows, man, do you know what riflings are? Anyone not? And when drilling, most of the rifles that first came out, the bore inside of them was smooth. And when that gun was fired, you didn't know which direction that ball was going. You knew that it was going to go close to your target or in the direction of your target. It may be just like it would be like hitting a golf ball. It may slice, it may hook, it may fly straight. It depends on who made that weapon if you read about the Washington in the French and Indian War at Braddock's defeat, there was an Indian that shot at him like 6 times and he was close to him. And they thought that he was under the protection of the gods. Well, his barrel was big. It was just that he had fired his weapon so many times it got hot and he had warped his barrel, and he didn't know Kentucky windage. The Battle of New Orleans is where the windage, part of the windage, the Kentucky windage. You'll see them, they'll lick their finger and then they'll touch the barrel. Well, that's kind of stretching it a little bit. A lot of them would have a little string hanging down underneath the barrel with a little feather tied on. I know a friend of mine not long ago, whose son borrowed his rifle. He had a feather hanging off the barrel, his son cut it off, and he was mad when he brought it back. But the reason they were doing that is to see which side of the sight dried first. I mean, they literally would wet the sight and look at it for a minute to see which side dried first. You knew that was the side the wind was coming from. A lot of people didn't understand. If you ever watch Lonesome Dove, when old Gus got shot in the leg with that arrow, they were shooting at him like, I don't understand trajectory. But you can shoot and there can be a hill there and that bullet can literally get up and get over that hill and hit something behind it. So trajectory was in windage was very important, They make, still to this day, you can buy old range finders that they used their sharps had a flip up sight that they could use. But the Kentucky rifle, with this book, it talked about how, and they called them the long hunters because they were traveling a long, long way. But what the Kentucky rifle allowed it to do is we said both of them were, if you are a weapons person, you're not supposed to use the term gun. If you're a weapons person, you know the different sizes of the calibers. Well, your first rifles that it came out, they were 65 to 75 calibers, which means they were huge. So when this Kentucky rifle came down, they shot anywhere from, it dropped to a 45, even down, some of them down to a 42, and it allowed you to get more bullets, more balls out of a pound of lead. Which means if you decrease the size of the ball and you put riflings, all the riflings in that barrel, all they did is they wanted that ball to spin. And it's like a pitcher throwing a baseball, throwing a curveball, or throwing a knuckleball. You take a little bit more, you take a lot more control out of it when you're doing that. So it caused this ball to spin. And it would go farther, and it would be more accurate. Your caliber was smaller, but the effect was the same. Now with the Kentucky rifle, does anyone in here shoot muzzle loaders? Where you know the saying. Powder, patch, and ball, or it won't work at all. Because if you mess up, you put some ball in it before you put your powder in, you're up the creek without a paddle. You're in big trouble, especially if you taking that ramrod and pushing it down. So with the patch, the powder and the patch and the ball, this is the Kentucky rifle was the first weapon to use the patch. And all the patch would be a piece of cloth or real thin buckskin, and they used the frontier people had to use the bear for the same thing that we use the hog for today. So they use it for lard, but bear oil was used for everything. So you took your patch, and some of them actually wore a shirt with a longer tail, and they had a knife, a small knife on the lanyard, and for their patch, they would cut off a little niche of their shirt. And they would have bear grease with them. A lot of them carried their patch in a little grease, in a little bear skin tin. You know, and metal was hard to come by, but what that patch did, when you put the powder in, and then you could put that ball, you could press your ball down into your patch, put it in the barrel. And when it was easier to slide down, you could load quicker, you could load quieter, but with the grease and that patch, the rifles would actually cut into that patch a little bit, you would have a tighter seal, and your weapon did not misfire near as much. So the Kentucky rifle, it shortened the length of the barrel, it took weight away, it made it more accurate, you could get more balls out of a pound of lead, it was just a winner altogether. For the world, in a sense. The use of the label Kentucky Rifle became more popular after the song The Hunters of Kentucky. And that wasn't published until the 1820s. The term Kentucky windage originated as a means of aiming this weapon and entering into military slang based on Kentucky sharpshooters in the War of 1812. Now, we're going to get to the sharpshooters at the Battle of New Orleans. There is a statue to this day in Greenville, Kentucky. They give the guy credit for winning the war. I don't know where he won the war, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. It is 4 minutes still. Any questions, complaints? I've enjoyed your company. I've stumbled and stammered a little bit. I've never done the War of 1812, but I appreciate you all coming tonight. We will pick up here next Tuesday at the same time. Like I said, I've allocated 3 Tuesday nights for this. I think we can get through this in 3 nights. And as I said, I know Kentucky, I think it's lame. I'm not ashamed to say it, but I will say it. This is the first time in a long time I don't have Kentucky Eagle in my house. And I don't know why, but I do know it.
But thank you so much, Skip.
Yes, and I thank you all for now, and hopefully I will see you all next Tuesday. So I'm gonna do this, we're gonna do this